Hello, this is Anna Lowe, and I'd like to invite you to join me as I scout for locations for Book 4 in my Fire Maidens series. Originally, I was thinking of making this book Fire Maidens Lisbon, but as you'll see, an unexpected discovery made me broaden my horizons and add an exciting new dimension to the book, which became Fire Maidens Portugal instead. I promise I'll explain, but let's begin at the beginning, in Lisbon. What I loved about Lisbon, it's a relatively small city that's easy to get around and to explore on foot, or maybe with these streetcars, which is one of the first things you notice when you're there. And true to that, the opening scene in my book, in fact, is in a streetcar, just for that reason. And as I always do, as I walk around the city, I keep an eye out for interesting buildings that could serve as inspiration for key locations in the story. And in this square, my eye first went to the bright streetcars that go by. But as I looked up, I saw that white house up there, and I thought, that is it. That is the perfect house for Marco to own. It's high above Lisbon, has a view out over the river and out toward the Atlantic, and just a perfect place for a dragon. So I found the first location for my story very quickly. Another thing that struck me as I walked around, Lisbon has this low central part of town, and these high, it's kind of like a valley. So the bottom of the valley is in the center of town, and then there's the hills on either side. And to make it more manageable for citizens, they have these these elevators that you can take from the lower part of town to the upper part of town. They're a little bit like Eiffel Tower-esque. So I took one of them, and it's great. As you look down over the rooftops, you see what really comes to life is the beautiful pavements throughout the city streets, all of them with different patterns. There's a wavy pattern, and you might get this geometric pattern, and it was so easy to imagine that from a dragon's eye view. And all that eventually went into some of the detail you'll notice in the very beginning of Fire Maidens Portugal. I won't give it away, but if you've read it, there's an escape at the very beginning, and that's where views like this come into play. It was a fascinating detail for me as I walked around, and it was just so easy to imagine myself up in the air looking down at these patterns, which would be that much more spectacular from a dragon's point of view. I started my explorations early one morning, and this is the Plaza de Comercio on the river, and that is stunning. It was nobody there in the early morning, which is great. And if you turn around from this view, you get this view, and that's kind of the triumphant arch going down the main shopping street. And again, I don't know, maybe I have an overactive imagination, but the first thing I thought of when I saw that was, oh, how cool, I could get a dragon to fly through there. You know, kind of where you see those old-fashioned like dog-fighting scenes with like World War I biplanes, you know, when they turn on the side and they go vroom, and they whiz through a narrow space where by turning their wings sideways. So that was one of the first things that caught my eye and indeed made it into the book. So I spent the day walking around exploring the city, and sooner or later, of course, you need lunch. And this is the Mercado de Ribeira. I think it was it's a former food market, as in really, you know, with crates of food and fruits and vegetables and vendors selling in large quantities. But it's been renovated and made into like a giant food court. And I just went there for lunch because I had to have lunch, of course. And of course, with my sweet tooth, I ended up with the pastéis, these little custard pies. But that became another location in my book. Maybe in some ways it's easy to write a story. Just go to a city, walk around and explore, have a meal, keep your eyes open for interesting buildings and interesting sights, and piece by piece, the story comes together. Originally, as I said, I imagined the story taking place entirely in Lisbon. And I was thinking, okay, where would the Guardians live? Because, of course, the Guardians, you would want them in like a classy location. So what's a classy location for Lisbon? And that is, of course, Sintra. Sintra is a town outside Lisbon, high up, and there's beautiful villas, and there's one particular castle that a lot of tourists go to. I went there on my very first visit to Lisbon. It's kind of one of the must-see sites, the spectacular castle in Sintra. but the villas all around it are just as spectacular. It was very easy to imagine the Guardians living up there in their own kind of hideaway, high in the hills. And no matter where you go, well, I think throughout Portugal and definitely throughout Lisbon, what's big are these blue painted tiles called azuelos. And some of them are actually painted with scenes. So this is like a scene of the city of Lisbon. And that is another detail that went in my book, because when Marco goes to the Guardian compound, he has to wait for quite a while, and he's walking around their gardens. They have these kind of fancy gardens, and they have a whole wall of azuelos showing the history of dragons and other shifters. So it's a scene just like this, but I changed it around to have shifters in it. So I had a really enjoyable stay in Lisbon, and that's where I really expected to build the story around. I went home thinking about how can I now build my story around that. And that was percolating in the back of my mind while I was still writing book 3 in the series, which takes place in Rome. Meanwhile, sometime around that, a few months later, I think it was, my family and I decided we wanted to take a hiking vacation. And I really had planned it as a total vacation. No writing, no researching, nothing. Just hiking in a beautiful location. And we decided to go to Madeira, the island of Madeira. It's out in the Atlantic. It belongs to Portugal. And we went there for the spectacular scenery and, as I said, the hiking. But it was so stunning that I just couldn't help but, again, picturing dragons flying through these incredible valleys and past waterfalls, and in no time I thought, okay, Madeira has to make it into this book. So what started out as Fire Maidens Lisbon quickly became Fire Maidens Portugal, to include this new location, and it really does have these incredibly well-maintained hiking paths all over the islands, because they had these canals to bring water down from the mountains. And you need these little trails to maintain them. So it's really a hiker's paradise. And some of that featured in the story as well. But really, it was those spectacular mountains, and it's just all too easy to imagine, dragons swooping in and out of these incredible mountain views, and maybe having a hidden treasure or two up there. So that's how Madeira made it into the book. And I also, of course, like I said, I always keep an eye out for spectacular homes that could feature in the book. So this is Marco's house on Madeira, or this is the inspiration for Marco's house in Madeira. And I didn't see it in real life, but what happens is I also look on real estate listings for spectacular properties, and this was it. I thought it was a great location. This is the bedroom of this place that was selling for many millions. And this is the bedroom where I imagine Laura waking up, and just the views on the north coast of the island from there. So I hope that gives you a little taste of the places that inspired some of the scenery and details in Fire Maidens Portugal. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you enjoyed the story most of all. Thanks for traveling with me on this trip, and I'll see you next time as we get ready to go on location for Fire Maidens Ireland, Book 5. See you then.